Hello everyone. Welcome to Form 5 Religion at St. Anselm's Abbey School, more commonly known to students here simply as ethics, although more properly known as Catholic ethics, since we are looking at the Church's particular tradition on how we address these questions of the meaning of life and how we should live. How do we live well? How do we achieve happiness? How do we reach our last end, become partakers in the divine nature? This class is the capstone class at St. Anselm's in the religion department. It draws heavily on all that we have done together in 9th and 10th grade, and as such is the most difficult of our classes and the most demanding in terms of what it expects out of students. Good luck. In this short video, I simply want to go over our goals for the class and a really basic look at our procedures, how the class will actually run. I think you will find that it is not too different from what we have done in previous years. So our first goal in ethics is for you to develop a moral vocabulary and tools for analysis. What do we mean when we say ethics? What are we doing when we do it? What are we looking at? How do we break things down? There's a large vocabulary that goes with that, and a lot of that vocabulary is used more broadly than just in the Catholic tradition. It's used throughout academic philosophy and all the different kinds of ethics there are out there. But we are going to be looking specifically at the way the Church uses it, uses these terms, these ideas, and a particular way of addressing action, inaction, what makes an action good or bad, how do we go about achieving our goals, how do we direct ourselves, what are the things that we have to look at. The class will build heavily on the natural theology that we began in 9th grade. And as such, there's a corresponding natural ethics, the kinds of things we can know about good and evil by reason alone, just like 9th grade covered a lot of material in terms of what we could know about God by reason alone. So we'll be starting there with a very basic look at the basic elements of what does it mean to act, and what does it mean for an action to be voluntary, and what does it mean to be free? What do we mean when we say that something is good or bad, morally speaking? We're going to draw heavily on the convertibility of transcendentals, which you have not looked at, I think, since we talked about the privation theory of evil in 9th grade. And even though we're going to start with a heavy dose of natural ethics, we are eventually going to unite this in a very brilliant article by Aquinas with revelation, so that this will ultimately be a harmony of faith and reason, like the other things that we've done here at St. Anselm's. And that pattern should be pretty familiar from our previous years. Second goal, a little bit more practical. Learn to read Thomas Aquinas. Reading is, of course, one of the primary goals in all my other classes. You know this by now. But this time the reading is tough. You're going to be simply reading articles, whole questions of Aquinas. You're going to learn to do it. You're going to probably find it daunting at first. It is a little intimidating. However, Aquinas is the most methodical of the authors of his age, or certainly one of, and he's very clear, relatively speaking. I would say he's the easiest read of his contemporaries in the 13th century. And so, while the initial shock might be pretty big, I think you'll find that the Quaestio method and the way he works through it and his transitional statements and his method of arguing is very, very rigorous, but also very systematic. It's small steps, many small steps, and I think you'll learn to do it. By the end of the year, you should have a pretty good reading facility with Aquinas, and if you can achieve that goal, you'll find that you can read quite a bit of anything. Now, the third goal in ethics is the long-term goal. Ethics is not simply an academic discipline. I'm not simply trying to familiarize you with a 13th century author, and I'm not trying to get you to memorize a bunch of vocabulary from the Catholic tradition. Ultimately, ethics is the practical science of happiness. It's the study of the question, how do I live well? How do I become happy? In what does that happiness consist? So my goal for you in ethics is to become happy. It's to live well. It's to become a partaker in the divine nature. Aristotle, for pretty good reasons, thinks that young people can't really learn ethics, that it's something that's best left for more mature adults. We're going to try to prove him wrong. in the hopes that this study will someday pay off for you. And in the hopes that you can begin to think seriously about some ethical principles, some moral principles. It's always best to acquire those principles and think about them clearly before they are put to the test. Ultimately, we are trying to explore the academic and personal side of the school's motto. Our school motto is Pax in Sapientia, peace in wisdom, a peace that is found in wisdom. And in some way, that's just what it means to do ethics. Pax in Sapientia is an ethical principle. It will be one of your final exam essay questions at the end of this year, explaining to me, in light of all that we've learned this year in ethics, what do we mean by Pax in Sapientia? So that's it for goals. What are you going to need in order to perform well in this class? Our textbook is written by St. Thomas Aquinas. The Summa Theologiae is a textbook, as I've told you before, for beginners, although pretty advanced beginners. And that's the only text we're reading. We might use another secondary source in the spring semester. I often make use of Joseph Pieper's Four Cardinal Virtues. But this year I think we're going to experiment with all Aquinas all the time. The textbook is free online in multiple places, in both English and in Latin. I will provide links to those in our online classroom, so you should have no difficulty accessing them. I'll provide the links with every assignment that we do. The Latin won't matter much, but when it does matter, we'll look at the Latin, and I expect you to be able to handle parsing a couple of phrases in Latin. Nothing too crazy. I'm not going to make you translate an entire article. But when something is unclear or ambiguous in the English, you should be able to flip over and make use of that language that you have been studying for the last 2 to 4 years here. And for that, we will make use of Corpus Thomisticum, which is a great website. Now, on the right side here, other things that you're going to need for success, and other things that you're going to be doing. Well, you're going to need to take copious notes. You're going to be creating your own commentary on the Summa. And at the beginning, you're not going to really know how to do that. You have generic note-taking skills that you've been mastering over the last few years. I expect you to be good at that by now. But handling the quaestio method and working your way through objections and said, what is the role of the sed contra, and what is the primary distinction in the respondio, and things like that, that's new to you. So I'll be showing you how to do that. But you're going to want to have summaries of what you read before we have class together. You're going to want to have questions. You're going to want to have comments. You should be able to summarize in just a few words, what is this objection about? What is he doing here? What is the basic argument of the respondio? And I expect you to grow in that ability through the years. So there will be a lot of note-taking with your reading, as well as expanding on that note-taking with what we do in class. You're also going to need a seminar-style engagement with the material. This class is loosely set up on the model, a high school version of college seminar, where you're going to be doing the reading in advance, and you're going to post discussion questions about the reading online in a forum that I will provide for you in advance. And those are the questions that we will look at together in class. There are going to be times where I have to simply explain articles to you, but most of the material that we work on together will always be in this seminar style. It has to come from you. And if you come into this expecting to be passive or waiting for me to download the information to you, this class will be excruciatingly difficult. It's going to be hard enough as it is. But without this kind of engagement of really trying to learn it, you're going to get run over by a truck. It's going to be terrible. This last point at the bottom, related actually, is wonder and ponder. Some of my favorite philosophy terms. And I've told you throughout the years together, that we've had together, that ultimately you need to be able to think deep thoughts about questions that matter. And not simply hunt for the shortest and easiest answer to questions, or even the answers that necessarily feel right, but to meditate on things, to contemplate things, to think about the truth of things. Now, I expect that over the last few years, you've actually gained the ability to do that, and now is when you prove it. All these things on the right side, in theory, you've been perfecting over the last few years. Well, we're going to make you get a lot better. And now is the first time where I'm teaching you a class where you really can't make much progress. The progress will be painful unless you spend time reflecting on what you've read and thinking about what he means and in what way is he right and in what way is he wrong and what other things can you connect it to. You're just going to have to spend time in thought. That will ultimately be your guide toward success in this class. This is really all you need to get an A in ethics. Good luck. Here's what I'm going to give you to make it easier. I will provide recorded lectures on YouTube, 1 or 2 per week, depending on how much we're doing that week. Same kind of format as this, looking at specific articles, the problematic parts of the articles, maybe an overview to get us started on what we're going to be looking at together. I'll give you written lecture notes, not necessarily everything I'm ever going to say, but certainly any slideshows that I put up in a video you will have access to in the online classroom. I'll give you some bonus material, some additional things to read. There will be outlines or summations of the articles and the questions. You will have all these things in advance. You'll have all these things before we ever meet together in class. If you don't want to look at them and you don't want to make use of them, that's your business, but I think that's a mistake. You're going to want to engage with all that material, or at least as much as you have time for. I'm also going to provide a discussion forum for you in the online classroom. That's going to be very pragmatically where you do your homework assignments, making your posts, your discussion questions that you post before we have class together. But that needs to be an active place. It would be a tragedy, it would be a waste if that discussion forum each week had 40 or 45 independent, unrelated questions shouted out into the void, many of which would be repeated, I'm sure, many of which would be superficial. It should be a place where you ask questions and get answers from each other and from me, a place where the class actually takes place. So some of our class time will happen there, and your activity there collectively, not individually, but collectively, will be a big part of your success in this class. And then finally, we'll have Zoom classes once or twice per week. I will not lecture to you during Zoom. I will ask you questions about the reading during Zoom, and you will give me answers. Don't show up to Zoom not ready to go, because I'm going to ask you to tell me what the first objection is about. Or I'm going to ask you to tell me the first or the second half of the distinction. You should be ready to go. You should be ready to discuss. If I have to download all that information to you during Zoom, it's not going to go well. Now, down the right side there, you can see the way I'm going to assess you. And it's very similar to what we did in 9th grade. We're going to have weekly content quizzes, roughly weekly. Every time we finish a batch, at the beginning it'll be one article of Aquinas, and then it'll be a few articles, and then it'll be a question. You'll have quizzes on those. Those quizzes will be some mix of essay and short answer. You'll have 2 tests per semester. This is possibly going to change. I'm not entirely sure how the timing will go with distance learning. Things might get a little weird. But the goal is to have 2 tests each semester, as well as a midterm in December and a final exam in May. And all 4 of those, the 2 tests per semester, the midterm, and the final, they will be essay only. So you can think about the midterm and the final really as more like papers, if you like. And I will ask, well, anywhere from 1 to 3 questions on them, and you will write at length, deep thoughts, profound thoughts, hopefully. And that's it for the basic format of the class. We don't have too much more to say, I think, in an introductory lecture, so I'll just leave you with something I taught you in 9th grade, something I say at all my classes every year. But we've read this. We started 9th grade with Plato's allegory of the cave. Now is an important time for you to remember it and its lessons about what is happening when we learn. I can't make you learn anything, and I can't make you have fun doing it. Learning is an activity of your mind and nothing else. Distance learning is actually a beautiful thing, in a way, because it strips away all of our illusions about what school is. Distance learning doesn't actually make learning harder. It makes it harder for you to lie to yourself about what learning is. It makes it harder for you to pretend to learn. When we're in room 5 at St. Anselm's Abbey School, you can all trick yourselves into believing that because you're sitting in a magic room and my words are bouncing off the walls and penetrating your brains, you're learning things. And that's not what learning is. You learn when you exercise your mind in pursuit of the truth, when your intellect is shaped by the objects that it considers. That's no different now than it was when we were in class together. So if you choose to learn, and I will help you do it, you will do well. And if you sit back and wait for me to teach you whatever you think that means, things will not go well. And I know you know this, or at least you've been reminded of this every year, but it's important to remember it as we begin again. If you have any questions about how this class is going to go or content as we go through the year, you know how to reach me. I've set up multiple platforms for you to get a hold of me. Happy to answer questions whenever I can. I look forward to seeing you all in class. God bless. Stay safe.